what can you do? You can edit this. You can edit these
Clips?
these clips.
Yeah, they get dumped onto a computer actually, and then once it's in there, you can just, from the word processor,
You can take parts out and add
slice
parts.
and dice, and cut and paste.
Oh, you can. Oh, wow.
We can rearrange this just like you can in a word processor.
That's amazing.
It's great.
I'm still awed by it all, actually. I'm awed by the fact that you can have a conversation with somebody around the world on this thing.
My parents didn't have TV when they were young. I mean, it wasn't invented.
Right. Yeah, we didn't have it until I was 13 in our house.
It's amazing. I mean, the acceleration of the changes that are happening is expediting our own demise, obviously, but
So do you think we're at a standstill right now as far as technology, or do you think that
it's accelerating. It's moving
it's accelerating?
faster.
I mean, what do you think is the next great innovation, technological innovation to move on the planet? Solar, I mean, really advanced solar technology. I mean,
That would be
we're just
great.
in the infant stage.
That's not
right
going to
now.
happen until the new age, though.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence.
Because that goes against capitalism, basically.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, unless where they can find a way to manipulate the whole field of technology to make a profit.
I think we're going to skew evolution. That's what the technology is going to take us to. It's going to be a combination of technology and biology. The two are going to become linked, and it's going to just change our evolutionary pattern and alter our.
That could happen.
What do you mean, man?
It's already happening. Pacemakers, artificial ears. But when the technology gets far enough along that it goes to a genetic level, it really will have an impact.
There's a verse in Psalm 82 that says, I said you were gods, but all of you shall perish like men. And it seems like technology has also brought us to the edge of the fateful eventuality that man may indeed try to recreate life in his own fallen, technocratic.
It's like the old Frankenstein. Right?
Yeah.
They're trying to actually reinvent man, which is it's basically the fall from grace. The whole Frankenstein myth was a fall from grace, really.
A fall from grace.
Well,
Oh, wait, you mean Dr. Frankenstein?
Dr. Frankenstein
Yeah,
was putting
and-
himself on a level of almost as a deity. He was trying to create life
Yes.
through science.
And what he did is created a monster, right?
Right,
With
so I guess even in the 1930s they could see,
Mhm.
When you think, centuries before, just how many centuries went by that people just lived by candlelight. 17th century they had candlelight, 16th century they had candlelight, 15th century they had candlelight, as far back as you can go. And then all of a sudden the 20th century hits, and it's like boom, 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 light bulb, TV, computer, jets, space stations. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
When you put it in context of time itself, it's
Yes. And when you also look at the curve, the curve of human planetary population, of human population, you see that there was a steady, very gradual, very progressive increase in the population of the Earth, and then the 20th century appeared, and the curve went. And it seems to me the only real way to understand that or to interpret it is the fact that not only are there very many ancient souls appearing in the earth at this time, souls that are coming into the earth with the collective consciousness of the history of man already ensouled within them, but there's also billions of brand new souls coming into the earth, just beginning their journey into the future generations and centuries. So you have these old souls here today that are assimilating all of these ideas that are coming out of the mind of God into the earth, and they have come already with the ability to understand and interpret and assimilate these ideas. And you have many brand new souls, of course, who haven't even begun to ask the first questions and may not in this lifetime. It may be 2 or 3 lifetimes before they actually begin to ask the questions that even some children are asking in our time. You have children today that are, you can see by looking into their eyes and of course then reading the content of their spirit, their soul, that these are very old and ancient souls, and they've come into the world at this time to help God turn the wheel of Genesis, because a whole new age is in the process of being born. And so it would be natural that God would send in souls that could facilitate this turning of the great wheel. And so you see these little children, you can see the fire already bright in their eyes, and already they're asking philosophical questions. I mean, but at a very basic level, but they're trying to reassimilate the wisdom that they had to leave behind as they entered into fetal form. But now as they're emerging again out of the womb and back as individual, they are quickly gathering the information that their brains, their minds are already programmed to accept. So you see these little children, they're asking about basic nature of physics, the basic nature of the way things work. They're talking about God, they're talking about sexuality, and they're already preparing to suffer in the necessary ways, but also to enjoy life in also the necessary ways, to experience it in all of its array. So, and it's a wonderful time, of course, to be in the earth, because it's now, as the scripture says, that now is the effect of every vision. Now is the unfolding of divine reality.
Do you consider this a wonderful time to?
Oh yeah, it's the most, it's a scary time to be alive, because all of the emotions, all of the human emotions are being brought to peak activity. Love, hate, war, peace, knowledge, ignorance, everything is straining to this moment. There's a climax that's getting ready to unfold, and something is getting ready to be born. And just as every child is born out of the darkness of its own mother's womb, so that we in this generation are being born out of the darkness of this age.
So like the Space Baby in 2001.
What is this?
The Space Baby in 2001, at the end of 2001, a baby is born.
Oh, in the movie
Yes.
2001, yeah.
Which ironically is
Oh, 2001. That's very interesting, yeah. Yeah, that's,
kind of foresaw something being born at that point in the history.
yeah, very interesting. That's, Revelation 12 speaks of that, when I saw a woman clothed in the sun. And of course, having come to the end of the age and this fullness of time, having come to the sign of the balances in the great cosmic scheme of things, we see that the world is completely out of balance, out of harmony with the unfolding of divine reality. But in reality, it's not, because part of our understanding of quantum physics is the whole necessary aspect of chaos theory and disorder, and all of these things that seem to be working towards disorder are literally bringing us to a state of order. Out of the light comes darkness, out of death comes life, out of ignorance comes understanding. And so the whole world is approaching this moment of intense, thick darkness. Everything that seems to be out of sort with all that we imagine God to be is literally bringing us to this moment of cosmic consciousness, bringing us to this moment where the light will be born, and the affairs of our time are a necessary corollary for these things to be born. And so yeah, so it's a wonderful time in the world to be born, especially in terms of religion and science. And today I had a very wonderful conversation with a young black Rasta man from Jamaica, and we spent 2 hours on the street corner talking about not only the birth of wisdom and understanding, the appearance of knowledge in the earth, but literally the appearance of love. And we were talking about how would you name the new religion that is in the process of being born. And he said, there's only one name to give it, and he says it's love. Love fulfills the scripture, love fulfills the law. And love is what God is creating, even though many skeptics don't see it. It's nevertheless latent in the collective affairs of our planet. And the only reason that we can't exercise love in its fullest form is that we are all literally weighed down and burdened by the affairs of our age, by the affairs of darkness. And these are the things that are keeping us from coming to our fullest potential. And so we see that nature is also doing something else, and that is rising up to this occasion. God, who dwells in the sum and in the substance of all reality, is rising up in the sum of this reality, in the sum of the nations and of all the people on the earth, getting ready to cleanse the earth of the present darkness. These are things that were written in the scrolls, things that were written in the prophets, things that are written everywhere in the past, and now we've come to this great moment of climax. The rabbi said as we approach the moment, the resistance to the moment will be great. As we approach the concept and the idea of tikkun, repair, just as we come to the point where we can repair everything that is broken, that we can rise up out of our fallen state, the inertial force that exists as a basic premise of our existence, the resistance to newness will also be great. And so that's what we're experiencing. That's the turmoil that we're experiencing, because the resistance to the light is as powerful almost as the emerging birth of light itself. And that's, but it's all part of the balance and harmony of the universe. In order for God to create a great state of love, they also had to create a great state of darkness, a matrix out of which this love and understanding could emerge. So we find ourselves experiencing this darkness, this gross illusion and grace, the gross resistance to light.
Right. I've been thinking a lot less and feeling a lot more. And what I've been learning about, not in an intellectual sense, and have really been feeling more, is a sense that there's sort of like a field of energy around not just every sentient being and plant and organic element, and even non-organic elements to a much lesser degree. But around people, there seems to be this sort of kind of energy that they carry with them. And most people have been conditioned or just misguided, not by something we can put the blame on, like society or culture or their parents, because it's all rather perfect, but we sort of like to feed off of each other's energy. Especially, I feel it now in a place like New York. It's a feeding frenzy. It's sort of like everyone who wants energy comes to this city, and it's a place where people just feed off of each other. And it's actually part of the deception. It's part of eating of the tree, but it's really a deception, because once you start to see that and it's happened so subtly, but people have the need to, we don't always recognize it on this level, but every time they need to say something about themselves to make themselves feel better, or even in a very subtle way say something about somebody else to make them feel worse, even though you couldn't really accurately accuse them of it because it's just so subtle and so... You with me? I'm having a tough time trying. I want to be as accurate as possible. You know, you can't really call them on it. They may not even be aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really all about kind of like taking someone else's energy, and it's about not understanding that people have boundaries, and and there's a density almost to that boundary system. And some people, very rarely, have broken from that and have been able to build up their energy, but not to the point where everyone comes and feeds off of it, but where they actually know how to contain it. And the whole point to my interjecting in this was, you were mentioning something about the intensity or the heaviness of the darkness in our time. For some reason it triggered in my mind this new feeling that I'm having in a place like New York, which I don't have in a place like San Francisco, which is, I almost don't feel safe on the streets, but not from a physical standpoint. It's because everything is so hard and your boundaries are constantly being violated. You know, people are constantly coming into with such aggression and interaction, and some people are almost vacuums. They're looking, they're disillusioned so much so they're completely internalized and focused on themselves, and it's actually just, it's not something that we really should judge. Well, of course, now I'm projecting my own personal, growth here, but it's something that I feel really kind of compassionate for.
Yeah. Well, in one of the parables, Jesus is talking about the sower that went out to sow, and when they asked him about the explanation of the parable, he said, "Know ye not this parable, then how will you know all parables?" And of course, what he was doing is he was taking the mind of the disciples back to the source, back to the beginning. And if we're going to place any blame, we have to find the right place to put it. And when we finally get to the source, we have to forgive the source, and we have to forgive ourselves, and we have to forgive everything, because God is the ultimate source of all light and all darkness. And that's why we must, if we are to attain to the consciousness of the universe, we must begin by forgiving. We must forgive our parents, ourselves, and we must forgive not only our parents, but we must forgive our parents' parents for their shortcomings, and then our parents' parents' parents, and we must keep going back, and we must let our minds return to the very beginning of the entire human epic, and then we must forgive God. Because if God did not create both the light and the darkness, we could not have come to this time in history as true sons and daughters of God. We could not say that we have touched the depth of darkness or the brilliance of the light, that God has somehow kept something from us. So in another place in the scriptures it says, from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. And so we've come to this place in history where we're all entering this vortex, where light and darkness are approaching this moment in time. And surely the light and the darkness, as they press into God's kingdom, the darkness, by the nature of its own existence, does feed off the light. It begins to soak up the light and begin to absorb it. weakening the light and strengthening itself. And as it does, we begin to feel unempowered, the children of light. We begin to feel like we have lost our bearing, our focus. But nevertheless, the light continues on at the speed that it operates at, and the darkness tries to ride into the vortex with the light, but it can't enter because it doesn't have the mass, it doesn't have the energy. Flesh and blood cannot enter the kingdom of God. So as we're all approaching this moment of the birth of the mind of light, only the light can proceed through the singularity. Only the light can be born. The darkness must remain in the womb, because metaphorically the darkness is likened to the flesh, the lower consciousness of the world, matter. The light is likened to the higher consciousness, which is pure spirit, pure light. And so when you come to the vortex of the black hole, only light can penetrate the singularity, and even something that operates faster than light. And the only, besides there's been a few examples of mathematical examples of where we have noticed matter moving faster than light, but it's only been in the electromagnetic range. And the only thing that literally travels faster than light is the human mind. The human mind can project itself faster than light through worlds and through universes and through spheres of understanding. But that light, of course, that mind has to be one that is coming to perfection in love, perfection in all that God is creating in us. And so, indeed, the light and the darkness are merging at that point together, but it's that quantum point where the universe is just opening and shutting and opening and shutting and opening and shutting, revealing the presence of a parallel universe. But it's only the light, and even that, only that which can move faster than light itself, can penetrate the singularity into what the Buddha calls nirvana, what Muhammad spoke as the place where the two seas meet, the waters above and the waters below. You see it in the diagrams of the Tree of Life, where the higher state of reality touches and joins at the point of physical manifestation with the lower world. And that point is the constant pulsating quantum rhythm of the reality of our universe. And it opens and closes, revealing this parallel and other universe. And we can attain to that universe in this very life that we're living, even without dying, at least not dying the second death, dying the first death, which is the death of the old self, stripping away the ego and all of the misvirtues that we have fallen into when our souls, when the soul of God became man. God brought not only with us the opportunity to experience darkness and experience evil, but also all the potential for rising above it and transcending evil. All of that came with God's descent through the epics, the exploding epics of the cosmos, where at the moment of creation, God appears, pure energy becomes matter. And then the first bits of matter are helium and hydrogen, the lightest of atoms. And then over the course of eons, epic events in the heavens, these lightest and lightest of elements begin to form stars and galaxies, and as they crunch in on themselves, what we're literally experiencing is the descent of God into the heavier elements. God is transforming themselves from energy, pure thought, through the field of energy to matter, and then through matter to the descending levels of heavier matter, great epic explosions in space. And that's why even in the Vedas, God is Agni, the most perfect sacrifice. In the Torah, God is a consuming fire. God is fire. God is transforming fire. And so God is descending, constantly descending, until finally the proto star that existed here in the space of our universe exploded and sent out into the universe all of the necessary material for the formation of our sun and the heavier elements that went into the formation of our planetary system. And then, but of course, God's descent is not complete, because now God, in the form of pure sunlight, is now descending into the body of the mother, who God is, of course, mother and father. And when the divine came into existence, that which was united with itself before creation, symbolized by the reality of the Tao, where all that seems to be dualistic is joined in one. So there was one thought, one God, one potential. When the universe came into existence, then that which was one broke into two, and then all of a sudden, not only did the gravitational field come into existence, but duality appeared. And so now we have the concept of pure thought above, materia, the phenomenal universe below, father, mother. And so never have these two been without each other. And through the descent, and it was the divine mother, the feminine principle, that is now broken off from the unity. She becomes negative energy. That's why we associate the feminine principle with negative aspects of life, and the negative sphere of morality, because the divine mother, who is God and who is equal with God, she was the one that descended to the lower worlds, into the material world, but she has always been one with her lover, her consort, her co-creator. And when finally we have the sun, the formation of the sun and the planets, the planetary system in which we live, all indicative of the 9 and 10 Sephiroth on the Tree of Life, with the planet Earth directly in the center. That's his Tiferet. Well, finally, you have then the two of them descending. God always remaining the principle above, the Divine Mother always putting on the garments of the principle below. She becomes Earth, and then he stops, and he is the sun. And this marriage between the sun and the earth and the proto moments of life in the earth, this brings the first stirrings. If you look at the DNA molecule, you see it's an exact replica of the Tree of Life, the plan that God used to create the universe in which we live. So all of a sudden, between them, they are creating in the proto structure of life itself, an image of the DNA, the image of the Tree of Life in the DNA sequence. And then through this DNA sequence, all of life begins to emerge on the planet. And of course, hidden in the structure of the DNA molecule is all of the potential for the evolution, the creation, and the unfolding of human consciousness. And so now we've come to this place in history where we can assimilate these ancient ideas and join them together at this end of the great historical spectrum with the things that are still unfolding, the reality that is we're still experiencing. And once we put the two together and see that it's a common electromagnetic wavelength, the beginning of creation and what is being understood and created right now, we begin then to get the first glimpse of the meaning, of the unity of God's presence in the universe. And it's only natural then to interpret quantum principles in terms of the essential meaning of life itself. And that meaning, of course, is that we are all created out of the very same substance. And individuality is, in reality, an illusion, because there is only one reality, and that is that reality that came into existence at the moment of what in the Kabbalah we call the Great Emanation, not the Big Bang. It's sort of a crude way of describing such a sublime act as the transformation of God's own presence into material and phenomenal reality. And so following the descent, we finally come to the creation of humankind in the earth, and we are now, over the course of eons and centuries and thousands of centuries, the scripture says, now let us make man in our image. And that's why we're made male and female. Not only because God is mother and father, and not only because we have this tremendous drive to be joined one to another in order to perpetuate life, but because there is in reality two universes operating side by side, one with the other, one flashing on, the other flashing off. And because we are the temple of God, male and female, we contain within ourselves and in our relationships to each other the image below of the higher order of reality above. And so just by the very fact that we are male and female and together we bring forth, only when we come together can life be engendered. So it's the very same way that in the center of the tree of life, where not only the male and female principle join together, because it's the same place from which they emerged in the beginning, but when we join together, not only is life engendered, but we literally come to the doorway of the other universe that is flashing and vibrating on and off. And the only way you can come to it is if you are in balance and in harmony with what is unfolding. And what is unfolding, of course, is the not only the expanding universe is not only unfolding, which we are now capable of understanding, but along with a universe expanding is the expansion of human consciousness. And we have now come to that critical point in time where the human mind and the literal universe itself can join forces and understand each other.
The word universe is...
Well, this audio will be picked up with all this.
Well, we're going to have outside sound, but it's realism.
We'll pick it up though.
Oh yeah,
We
I
won't
had the
lose-
headphones on.
Sorry to interrupt.
It would be good, maybe next time I'll try to get a little mic over here or something under the table, but
I'm just rambling on, really.
Want to capture it?
this is good. You know, whatever. I mean, no, the question I had was, universe is such a almost an ambiguous English word.
Yeah.
Can you describe more what you mean by these two universes and how they contrast to each other? What is this other universe? Is this one of them?
Well, again, in order to get a clearer insight into the unfolding historical realities of our time, we cannot divorce them from the past because it's a common thread. Just as, the universe is a seamless garment. So we can't imagine that the things that we understand today are independent or divorced from the basic ideas that humanity began to first entertain at the that God began to first ingrain within the human state of understanding. So it's a common thread. So we have to go back to the beginning to kind of understand what is happening today. And you don't have to go back so far, you just have to go back to the time of the birth of Christianity, where the Apostle Paul is looking into the oracles, looking into the symbol of the tree of life. He sees the image of this dying God suspended on the limbs of the cosmic tree. The navel being at the place called Tiferet, and the limbs expanding in not only leading the mind out to the outer reaches of the universe, but leading the mind itself into that expansive state of realization that we have finally come to in our time. So he looks into the tree of life, he sees the image of the unfolding four-dimensional reality, because he knows that the image of Christ on the tree of life is literally the story of creation itself. That's why in the book of John it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Of course, that's hearkening back to the book of Genesis, where it says, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. So naturally, in the oracle, there should be the mathematics and the equations of creation itself, of this realization. And sure enough, Paul sees it in the symbol of the mandala of Christ on the tree of life. He sees the four rays extending from the navel and immediately understands that there's four dimensions. And so, four dimensions must exist. In the 20th century, we found out that because these four dimensions are set in the backdrop of a tree of life that has 10 separate sephira, we're discovering, of course, that the universe is really comprised of 10 dimensions. But the central and expanding view of the universe is set and couched in a unfolding of four dimensions. We don't discover that fourth one until the 20th century, but Paul, in the book of Ephesians, says that ye being rooted and grounded in love, therefore alluding to the tree of life and the image of Christ on it, says that ye may with all the saints understand what is the length, the breadth, the depth, and then he names the fourth dimension, and he calls it the height. And of course, Paul's height is Einstein's space-time continuum. And even though the fourth dimension, the space-time continuum, is, you can't see the fourth dimension, you can only comprehend it. You can only conceptualize it with your mind, with the aid of mathematical equations and graphs, but you can't see it with your eyes because our eyes are only tuned to three-dimensional reality. So only the mind can pick up and conceive of a fourth dimension. And so it will take 2,000 years before science will discover the very existence and presence of this dimension that Paul spoke of. And Paul naturally was saying that if you want to understand the meaning of the Christ mystery, you must see it with your mind. You cannot see it with your eyes. If you read the scriptures literally, if you try to see things on a physical plane without first conceptualizing them on a higher plane, that's all you'll be left with. You'll be left in a geometrical, a Euclidean world. Euclidean world is made up of three dimensions, and that's it. So Einstein, of course, discovers that there's something very strange about reality in the 20th century, and he discovers using the mathematics of light, the things that everyone is questioning, but to Einstein it appears just absolutely apparent. Stop questioning the paradox, accept it for what you see. Light is the inertial frame of reference. There is no medium through which light is moving. Light defines the limits of the universe. If you're traveling at 100,000 miles an hour towards light, light being an extension of the mind of the universe itself knows that you're coming at it at 186,000 miles a second, and so it just speeds up. And when you measure it, 186,000 miles a second. If you shoot away from light and it's going away from you, the light knows that you're moving in that direction, so it turns around and speeds up so that you measure it at 186,000 miles a second.
Actually, it would slow down. Right?
Well, what I mean is no matter which way you are going, with the light, away from the light, as you measure it, it is the same.
Isn't the illusion of movement itself just an illusion? When you consider that we can't actually see these multi-dimensional planes with the fourth through the 10th dimension, are we even actually perceiving our own movement? Isn't it just an illusion?
Well, of course,
Maybe light is just that singularity, that point
it is that
in
point.
the center that's not moving at all. And maybe it's just us mentally projecting ourselves out into these dimensions.
Well, exactly, because that's what we're coming to when we discuss Einstein's fourth dimension. What Einstein discovers, of course, is the relativity, the relative relationship of all things to all other things. And now this is just the beginning of transcendent scientific thought, because Einstein takes us into a realm that boggles the imagination. Of course, science was moving into it already, because in the measurements of light itself, to comprehend, literally, I mean, you can hear the idea that light is a particle and that light is a wave. And unless you understand the mathematics of that, you say, oh, okay, you accept it. But if you're a physicist sitting at your table or in a laboratory and you're studying the mathematics of that reality, it boggles the imagination. How can the energy that is stored in a quanta or an atom be at one moment right there when you measure it as a particle? How could it be right there, but if you measure it as a wave, it's 186,000 miles away in 1 second? So where is it? It's either there or it's here. So all of a sudden we see that a very strange world is opening up to
Unifying theory.
yeah. And then also, the very idea that that two brothers can be born two twin brothers can be born at the same time. One of them becomes an astronaut, and he joins the Air Force. He enters the space program. He gets in a spaceship, and he takes off for a trip around the solar system. As he approaches the speed of light, he's literally leaving the time frame that his brother exists in, who's back on Earth farming, taking care of the farm. So the astronaut gets in the spaceship. He has a clock. In his little frame of reference, the clock moves around day in and day out for 1 year. So the astronaut comes back, he lands a year later and finds out that his brother's been dead for 300 years. So we see that there's something very strange about the universe once we enter into the field of relativity, and particularly as we enter into the field of quantum reality.
And you see that in the Gospels.
You see it in the Gospel because the Gospels are pointing, you see, the law and the prophets out of which the Gospels emerged were born from the law and the prophets. And it was the law of Moses that was handed down from Sinai that initiated the great philosophical debate and search for the true meaning of the Torah. It was this philosophical search that led not only into the field of philosophy, but eventually led into the field of mathematics, led into the field of alchemy, led into the field of chemistry, led into the field of pure scientific research that literally led into the field of quantum physics in the 20th century. It all emerged from the teachings of Moses, which emerged from the ancient wisdom that is the Vedic wisdom, more ancient than Moses himself. So what we see is we have this path, this succession of this ancient oral tradition being passed down and then finally splitting into all of the various disciplines of study in which we have found ourselves in the 20th century. Now we see that these disciplines of study are finding their way back to each other. You see, because that which was whole created the parts, but now all the parts are now recreating the whole, the unity. And so we find that Einstein now discovers a pathway into this transcendent realm. He doesn't realize what the ideas that he doesn't realize that from his theories will emerge the theories of black holes, how light is moving in gravitational fields, and through such intense gravitational fields that that the idea of a black hole comes into our language.
It's a bit of a misnomer. By definition, it's more of a compressed point.
It's a singularity,
It's a
right?
singularity as opposed to an emptiness. It's more of a fullness.
Right. But what it does is it fulfills what Paul said in the book of Romans in the first chapter. Paul says that the invisible things of God are clearly understood by the things that are made. So as we discover the essential nature of those things that are made, we begin to discover the invisible things of God, such as the pathway between this universe and another, which leads not to a black hole in outer space, but through a vortex that exists in the soul of every living individual. Every living individual contains within themselves a doorway leading out of this four-dimensional, phenomenal world across the black hole, if you will, into the other parallel universe.
So is that what the mystery of faith is?
Well, it's by faith.
Like when Jesus said to Thomas, "Blessed are they who believe without seeing." You're talking about science that we can't see with our eyes. They're not tuned to see.
Yes.
These dimensions. We have to see them with our minds. We have to see this with our minds as opposed to with our bodies and with the needs of our eyes. And
Yes. Well, the instructions or the saying of Jesus to Thomas falls in line with another whole other set of scriptural works that have to do with the very meaning or the very character, the type of this person, Thomas. There is in the Nag Hammadi scriptures a book called Thomas the Contender, and the Gospel of Thomas, of course. But the book of Thomas the Contender relates to this person who is Thomas, who is called the twin brother of Jesus. And that's because when Jesus was chiding Thomas, he was literally talking to the fact that this Thomas would appear in the end of the age in the person of the Antichrist himself, one of the 12. The first of the Antichrist, from which the number of the mark of the beast emerges in the book of Revelation, is Thomas Woodrow Wilson, the doubter, who could not see beyond that which he could only see. So Thomas, who appeared in the name of Christ as a great peacemaker in the world, if he could have seen into the fourth dimension, he would have seen that he was on the verge of declaring war against his own master, who was God, who had ascended in the sum of all of the events of the early part of the 20th century. This is when God rose up upon the mind of our generation to begin the judgment wars of the 20th century. So when Jesus is talking to Thomas and said, "Blessed are those who can see beyond that which they can see with their eyes," he was actually admonishing the Antichrist in the last day. And so, of course, had we been able to see into the hidden fourth dimension, as is our heritage to do so, we would have been able to interpret all of the events of the 20th century. We would have seen the divine milieu, as Teilhard Chardin used the term. We would have been able to look into the milieu of the unfolding reality of the 20th century to see the very terrible presence of the god of war himself. We would have seen Shiva descending upon the mountain, getting ready to roll the wheel of Dharma, the wheel of judgment across Western civilization. When Adolf Hitler appeared in Central Europe, he was doing so according to all of the ancient prophecies about God appearing and judging the world in the last time. The scripture says that I will, in the last day, God will appear and I will destroy my people. And Moses said, oh, that we were wise, that we understood our last end. Well, this is the many different forms in which God appears on the plane of human events. Had we been thinking with a higher state of consciousness, we wouldn't have seen this little tiny psychotic man coming up out of the environs of Vienna, Austria, but we would have seen Apollyon himself ascending out of the abyss, out of the depth of nature's consciousness, onto the plane of human events and beginning to bring the judgment wars of the 20th century, but that very terrible event which we know as the Holocaust. This comes directly from God, and it's only a fourth dimensional mind can perceive it.
Do you read into the symbol of the swastika as
Sure.
foreseeing?
Sure, the swastika is the symbol of the central pillar of the Tree of Life. Where the central pillar crosses the navel of the earth, that's Vienna, Austria. That's the center of the head of the dragon itself, great Leviathan. That place named Tiferet is that ancient city of David that exists not in Palestine. The reason we think it's in Palestine is because we haven't learned the parable of the fig tree. But the center of the fig tree, the center of the Tree of Life, is in the center of Europe itself. And that's why Adolf Hitler emerges out of the depth of creation itself. Just as those who are fooling around with life today, those scientists that are fooling around now with the genetic code of life. You see, God has told us that you must not eat from the dark side of the tree. Well, of course, we couldn't understand what that meant until finally we come to the 20th century and we see all of the plagues that are unfolding out of the dark side of reality. It's because, we had to see these things, naturally. If we had failed to touch the dark side, we would never have seen nuclear energy. We would never have seen the world wars. We would never have seen evil. And of course, it was God's plan that we see all these things. But now that we have seen them, now when God reiterates their instructions, okay, now you've seen the evil, now do not touch this part of the tree, because you have seen what you have already conjured up. Well, now, having seen all, had Adam been able to look into the 20th century, they never would have approached that tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because they would have seen with their eyes the absolute destruction, disorder, suffering, chaos, the misery, the terrors that have been the events of the 20th century.
But that's exactly why they couldn't.
That's exactly why, because it had to happen.
Well, the metaphor of the tree, not the literal interpretation, but if they would have eaten, if they wouldn't have eaten of the tree, then we could never bring ourselves.
That's right. We would never have known the difference between good and evil.
They were bound to.
They had to, because the Tree of Life is simply a metaphor for human experience itself, for human existence.
And what is
itself.
Adam and Eve in the garden? What's the metaphor for that?
Well, well, that's another whole.
All right, forget it then.
Sure, it's another whole thing.
It's another take.
When that starts blinking, by the way, tell me.
Okay.
All right.
It has to do with the very person of Adam themselves, and so that's
We'll save
another.
that for another time.
That's another,
What chapter is that in?
Another stream of thought. The fourth chapter.
Okay.
Third.
Because we haven't really done any chapter yet.
No.
Which is fine, but I mean, believe me, I'm of the soul to just let things go, right? Because that's really, forget trying to control anything. But maybe, can I ask you, so that we don't go off on too many tangents?
Well, I was on a stream of thought, and I was
Okay,
still answering the
sorry,
question. It
I'm
had
sorry.
to do with
Please finish then.
about that parallel universe, that universe that's flashing.
Right,
up
the one I asked you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was taking a long-winded way of
It's okay.
getting to it. When Einstein discovers this hidden fourth dimension in the 20th century, what he does is he opens up all of the potential, all of the possibilities for asking them the next set of questions. He opens up a door to cosmic realization, to scientific. He opens up the next level of inquiry because he has opened up a transcendent world. And so entering into it, now we're looking around in a strange new world that has other doors to it. And we can begin to open up those other doors, other than led to an understanding of black holes, gravitational fields. One of the others led Hermann Minkowski to take the equation. Hermann Minkowski was a Russian physicist who was a contemporary of Einstein's, and he takes the graph, the equation of Einstein's fourth dimension time-space continuum, links it up with Hubble's expanding universe, and then fixes the array of the equation on a two-dimensional piece of paper, then projects a ray of light across the field of this equation. And because of the mathematics of the speed of light itself, the light ray must assume a very fixed relationship to the idea of time and space on the equation.
He's not really shining a light over the piece of paper he's working on.
No,
this is all mathematical.
He's projecting a
conceptual.
mathematical
Okay.
ray of light. When he does, all of a sudden, looking at the equation, looking out into the world, he begins to see something about reality that it took Einstein to open up. But now Minkowski will take Einstein's theory to the next level. And he will see the point in the center of the equation, knowing that that's the navel of reality itself. That's the point of the birth of the universe. And from the universe appeared time, space, and light, and matter. So Minkowski looks around him, and he sees that the light defines man's place in the phenomenal universe. Everywhere that the light shines upon, everything that the light touches, defines man's future. If he can see it, he can travel there, provided he has, along the same line on the equation, enough time. If he has enough time, he can travel to any place in the universe that he can see. Okay, so he sees that ray extending out from the center of the equation, out that way, and he says, this equation defines the future. And then he understands, of course, because quantum science is moving along, and it was found out that the universe is moving and operating, expanding and contracting in quantum measures. The universe is not simply just flowing like this, but rather the universe is flashing on, off, on, off, on, off. And it's happening at such a tremendous rate that we cannot see it. Our minds cannot perceive what's going on in the universe as we sit here, in the world in which we are a part. And literally, to understand it, all you have to do is like take a time span of a minute, break it in half. Okay, so for 1/2 of a minute, we're sitting here talking. For the other half of the minute, we disappear. Well, we may not even know that we have disappeared, but for 1/2 a minute, we do not exist. Okay, so that seems like we'd be able to perceive something happened to us in this block of time. Well, let's just break it down to 15 seconds. Every 15 seconds we appear, and then for 15 seconds we disappear. We'll break that down to every second. Every second we appear, and then for a second we disappear. Well, then break that down to a 1/2 a second. Every 1/2 a second we appear, every 1/2 a second we disappear. Break it down further, 1/100th of a second, 1/1,000,000th of a second. Every 1,000,000th of a second we appear, every 1,000,000th of a second we disappear. Well, now, this transformation is going so fast that we will never perceive what is happening.
That's what film is.
Yes, film
You're
is just...
blinking here.
Film. Okay, I got 5 minutes in.
Okay,
Film
film
is
just...
It's actually 24 pictures per second,
There you go.
and there's blanks in between the films. So you don't have to really.
Exactly, and that's what's happening.
And
with
this is infinite.
Exactly, because what Minkowski then discovers is that at this moment in time, which is quantum in measure, and it's from this moment that everything that we see unfold